Hello, my name is Amy Smith, and I am president of the Red Hook Public Library. I'm about to do something weird with my microphone. It's not oxygen, it's just, you get less feedback that way. So, okay, so today I'm presenting about holistic programming. So you may be asking yourself, what the heck is she talking about? What I'm talking about is we don't have a guru now, and goat yoga is not yet mandatory for all staff. Holistic programming is one piece of a broader paradigm shift that we are using and so far enjoying at Red Hook Public Library. So this presentation is on just how that works for programming, but the holistic in the title is actually not just about, it's about an entire approach to librarianship. So everything I say about programming has implications for all the other parts. What the holistic refers to is the way in which we are approaching librarianship in Red Hook. So we're not taking programming as a discrete set of functions or activities. Instead, we're looking at the institution and how it's made up of overlapping and meshed things. So to explain how this works for programming, which is for this presentation, I'm going to start with a few fundamentals on how programs are developed and implemented at Red Hook. So my question is, when's the last time you were creative? Take a moment and just think if you can, see if you can think of something. So when I ask you that, what's the image that comes to your mind? Maybe you love to take photographs. Maybe your passion is to draw or woodworking, acting in some way. So maybe that's what you had in mind. Or maybe the image in your mind is a lot like the photo on your screen. It's kids and crayons and being creative while playing with them, drawing with them, making up stories. Or maybe you're one of the people who are thinking, well, actually, Amy, I'm just not a creative person. Creative. One of the things that we have found really important at Red Hook is to shift away from a very popular notion of creativity, which has creative as a synonym for artistic. It's common. It may not be what you're thinking right now, but it is really common. And the reason we think it's so important to examine how we approach being creative and creativity is because if you're limiting it to just being artistic, then you are limiting the way it can work for you. So then what is creativity in the Red Hook Public Library world? Creativity is an attitude. It's an open-minded approach to problem solving, and it applies to everything that we do. It works in Red Hook in part because we are trying very hard to have an ethos of non-judgment when it comes to ideas and idea generation. If we suspend our judgment when we are brainstorming, we get a lot more results. The way those results can work together can be more fruitful. So, what does it have to do with programming? Let's apply it. So if you are denying that your creativity or that there can be many sources that can inspire you to think creatively, to solve problems creatively, then you're basically locking ideas and behind a wall of judgment. When you do that, you're necessarily restricting your programming, because generating new content for programs in that mental space becomes onerous, it becomes hard to do. So let's run through examples of how this works in actual life. So where do program ideas come from? Well, they don't grow on trees and they're not delivered by the stork. So these images represent a couple examples of the ways in which I take ideas, my coworkers take ideas as we go about our daily lives. So maybe we get ideas and we get inspired when we interact with the local school district, when we talk to teachers, when we talk to students, when we observe, when we participate in community events there. We get ideas when the senior citizen pulls up her chair to the circ desk and talks for 20 minutes because she's lonely. We get ideas when we're out in the community, participating in local business First Fridays and various other events like that. We get ideas when we are, let's call it eavesdropping with kindness on the teens hanging out in our library, or when we sit down and ask them, hey, what do you want? What do you think? We get ideas when we're out outside, whether on our own or when we're trying to think of things for the library. And we get ideas by talking to staff, right? Different types of staff are going to interact with different patrons in different ways. They're going to have different experiences, and I dropped my mouse, different expertise. And in that way, golly, okay, sorry. Finally, the lady reading the newspaper. I'm going to give you a more detailed example. So the news, things that come to you can inspire you. One morning as I was getting ready for work, I was listening to the radio, and they had a piece, just a few minutes, about archaeological discoveries of traps for mammoths. So prehistoric and women had come together and were hunting together to build these enormous, mammoths. The name says it all, they're mammoth. So they had come together to dig these big holes and find ways to trap them. And they knew this trap was successful because there were a lot of mammoth remains. So I found this, I don't know, exciting. Maybe I'm odd. I sent a text message to my boss saying, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if we ever had a program where we could build mammoth traps? And she replied, because she, Dawn Jardine as our director, she said, ooh, this would be a great idea. What if we had caveman camp, right? Well, spring break was coming up. And during spring break, we typically offer camp-like content for kids. And so suddenly we had, from this odd 3-minute radio bit, we had content for a week's worth of programming, and it was fun and it was weird, but it was also going to teach the kids who participated and also the staff members who participated about how maybe our ideas of what prehistoric life was like are not entirely accurate. Okay, so if you adopt this sort of open-minded attitude that we are pushing, then anything might become a program. But so what are you going to do with that? Because obviously not everything can become a program. So we're going to take it back to a fundamental. If my space bar, oh my gosh. This is the stuff of nightmares. Can you hear me?
Amy, we can hear you.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
I can hear you.
I can't my slides.
You can't advance this. I can open up your slides and share my screen.
Sorry, I did it. I don't know what the problem was. I am so sorry. Okay, so
part of the fun, carry on.
Yes. So taking it back to some fundamental questions, we're asking you to think about what it looks like, both for your institution, but also sort of your personal definition. What does a successful program look like? So maybe it looks like this image, right? A room full of people, over 100 people listening to 2 learned speakers. And so in that regard, there's some success. But if you look at these people in the audience, not very engaged. There's a lot of closed body language. So there's perhaps 2 competing ideas of what might be successful just in this photo. So how we define success is going to affect what we do in programming. So in order to define it or examine that, let's talk about how we measure success. What are the metrics that your institution uses, and what do you personally use when you're trying to determine whether or not an idea is a success or something that you've implemented is a success or tried to? The answers to these questions are going to vary widely, right? Because all our institutions are different in purpose, in nature, and we are well. But once you've started asking or answering these questions, then the next point I am hoping people will go to is to ask themselves why. Why do I measure success in this way? Why does my institution measure success in this way? The reason to do that is to make sure that the metrics we're using are reflecting our goals. This slide represents a couple of the metrics we use in Red Hook Public Library. Attendance, we take attendance records and we're interested in how old the people are, what categories of age they fall in for different types of programs at different kinds of days. This is valuable information. We also, I know not everyone here is a public librarian, so project outcome, something that the Public Library Association put together to allow, to make it easy for public libraries to use customizable, essentially, participant evaluation and satisfaction surveys. And then if you upload the answers to the part that is from the template, you also can your results with other libraries and get some cross-pollination of ideas and experiences in that way. And finally, another really important metric is we all have limited resources. No matter what organization you're working for, how you're going to allocate the resources. And in our case, we are a public library, so that means that the vast majority of our funding, taxpayer dollars. So we always also have to be asking ourselves, is this a good use, a good application of the limited resources that our community is giving us? But not all programs have the same goal. Not all programs serve our community in the same ways. And this is where the question of how our metrics reflect our is one of the most important things I think that we can share with you. I'm going to give you two examples from Red Hook. So the first example is our pop-up library. This is something that we've been doing for many years. It originated as a collaboration with Bard College, which is in the Red Hook area, and the school district. Essentially in the summer times, originally, now we do it year round, but in the summer times we will take donated books to community events and give them away. So that means showing up in the parking lot of the best ice cream in town, the basketball games, the First Fridays, basically the of the pop-up library on the face of it is promoting literacy, right? Hey, who doesn't love free books? But really, the goal of the pop-up library is connection. It's going out there and connecting with the community, especially with people who aren't regular library users. If we want non-library users to recognize that the library is for them also, we're going to make this effort and go out and meet them where they're at. So in that way, the pop-up library is an example of a broad program because the attendance numbers for pop-up libraries are in the hundreds, right? But it is also a shallow program because content-wise, what do I need to prepare? I need to sort donated books by age. There's the physical labor of loading our cars and then it's reader's advisory. So the content is shallow. It doesn't require much from the people who are doing it, besides the muscles. But its reach is broad, and that is a very good indicator or a very effective way that we're meeting the goal of this community connection. In contrast, another program is the All Abilities Teens program for teenagers with intellectual and cognitive disabilities. These programs are perhaps narrow and deep. Average attendance is between 5 and 7 participants, always capped at 10. Each of these participants usually bring at least one caregiver to help them out. The goal of these programs is to provide opportunities for a segment of our patron population who don't have a lot of ways to connect outside of their school days. It is to help them recognize that the library is also for them, and it'll also give them the opportunity to participate in a program that centers their needs and experiences. The amount of preparation and the type of content for this program is very deep. There is a lot of work that goes into preparing it and to running it. So this is an example of a narrow, and the metrics we're going to use for that compared to the metrics we're using for a pop-up library are very different and should be very different. Okay, so if we establish that different goals are met by different types of programs, and therefore our metrics have to reflect that, then how do we know when it's time to fix something? Sure, your metrics may be telling you, but we also want to posit that sometimes, even when all your metrics are giving you great results, you still need to reevaluate and look at your program. So does it have to be broken to need fixing? Our emphatic answer at Red Hook is no, no, it does not. You may have the greatest attendance and the most positive customer satisfaction survey numbers. That doesn't mean that there isn't something to change. Again, I'm going to give you some examples. So for 9 years, Red Hook Public Library held and hosted the Monster Mash. It's a town-wide Halloween celebration pitched towards families. Very big event. Again, attendance numbers very high. People liked it. People talked about it. People looked forward to it. A slight downward trend in the last few years, but ultimately, the important factor is to consider this program in light of changing contexts. Over the years, both the town and the school district have started offering more programming, more community-oriented ways of celebrating the fall and Halloween. In addition, our boss, Dawn, she asked the staff, how do you feel about Monster Mash? Is this still something that's exciting you, looking forward to? And the answer was that honestly, we were starting to get a little weary of it. So Dawn looked at these factors and said, maybe now is a good time to stop having Monster Mash, or at least take a break from Monster Mash and just see if there aren't other ways that we can allocate those resources to benefit the community in a new way. Another example would be our summer reading program. So our approach to SRP is maybe a little different, but for the past 6 years, we've had summer camps that are themed weeks of content aimed at different ages. There's always different content, usually week to week, but definitely summer to summer, and slight changes in how many sessions were offered for different ages. Overall, the structure of our SRP camps had remained fairly static. One of the things that I noticed in the 2 years that I was have been involved so far in SRP was that the kids of the working families who were relying heavily on the library for after school time, for weekend content, but especially for time after school until the parents were able to pick them up at the library on their way home from work, those kids weren't participating in our summer programs. And so it prompted me to address that and say to some of them, hey, so why doesn't your child, not in an accusatory way, obviously, but these are free programs and these families who are regular library users. Well, it turns out, and in retrospect, it's a little obvious, the schedule that we have been using of 1 to 2 hour sessions, usually mid-morning and mid-afternoon, that schedule really relies on there being caregivers or parents who can bring the kids to the library after the program and provide activities and content for them the rest of the day. So for parents for families where both parents are working, that's just not always feasible. And what they needed was all day. Well, we're a small building with limited resources, so we couldn't provide all day. This was an opportunity, an idea that prompted us to start talking to community partners, seeing what other organizations were offering and how we might be able to build on that. So this summer, we're going to be piloting a program where we build off of the free half-day summer camp at the rec park and get transportation for the library, do their 2-hour educational content. That's fun, I promise. And then we're going to have extended hours to better serve these families. So again, the point is that the metrics of our SRP have always been good. Lots of people attend, and the people who attend really like it. But that didn't mean that there weren't things we needed to fix. And the way we found out about that was by asking. Last example, we noticed that we have, like a lot of libraries, public libraries, we have preschool programs in the mornings. And I noticed that the families who first language was Spanish, who speak mostly Spanish at home. They weren't attending the program. They were coming when the program was over, and people who had attended the program were basically leaving. So I approached one of the moms who I had gotten some rapport with, and I said to her, hey, so I've noticed this pattern, and she said, well, to be honest, it's because I feel a lot of antipathy from the other caregivers, and it makes us uncomfortable. So we come after they go. So this also then prompted a lot of changes, and I'm going to go into that later. But it was again a program story time that the metrics have always been amazing. Lots of people come, lots of people love it. But there were groups that weren't using it, and it turns out they weren't using it for a specific reason that we could address in a couple of ways. Okay, so success, it has another side. So I'm going to go back and ask you again to ask yourselves, what does failure look like? And again, separate it out. What does failure look like for your institution when it comes to a program? And what does a failure look like for you when it comes to a program? Maybe it looks like this picture, which is an empty room. Even for me, the thought of a program where no one comes, it's not a good feeling. No one likes that feeling. But what we do with those feelings is actually what defines how we think of failure. I go to a lot of conferences and a lot of meetings specifically about programming. And typically, at least one in one of these things will proudly say that they have never had a program where no one came. And that's cool, that's great. It's good that they feel so good. But when I hear that, I actually feel a little sad, because one of the things that indicates to me is that there's not a lot of innovation. They're sticking with the tried and true. And maybe that's not always true, but if you are so risk averse that you're not willing to try something that maybe people won't attend as well as your tried and true, then I question, this is a question I ask myself regularly, how am I serving the community? Am I only serving the community I already know? Are there other parts of the community I could be serving? Or the people who I am serving, maybe I can offer them other ways. So abstract thinking about failure as opportunity for insight is all well and good, but we live in what used to be the real world, or feel like a real world. And so what we need to do when we're thinking about failure is ask ourselves, what's at risk? What's at risk if a program fails for our institution and for ourselves? Again, this is going to be another set of questions that has a lot of answers. But I wanted to address a few ones that come up pretty quickly. Okay, so you may offend someone. You may make a mistake and really get someone upset. What are you going to do about that? Personally, and I'm very lucky that my boss is supportive of this approach, I just assume that I'm going to make mistakes and that I might offend someone. And I don't want to, but it could well happen. Being afraid of making mistakes and letting that direct my decisions when it comes to what I'm offering the community, and that would, to me, be much worse than actually making a mistake. So what do I do? What do I suggest? If you take a risk, make a mistake, someone gets upset, you apologize, listen to their concerns, listen to their ideas, learn more as needed, do the research, ask the questions, and then make a change. If it generally is appreciated more than scorned. Wasted resources, I mentioned, we all have few resources. Okay, so you have this idea, it feels a little risky, you don't want to waste a lot of resources on it, because what if no one wants it? What if it's not something your community is needing? So start. An example comes from our program coordinator, Renee Zahn. So we had a grant to offer a variety of senior programming, and there was an idea for local history lunch. As you know, if you're in public libraries or maybe any institution, if you feed them, they will come, but feeding them is expensive. So starting a series where we're offering lunch once a month and having a local history speaker is a pretty expensive undertaking. So we start small. We have one local history lunch in a series of other far less expensive programs. There are lots of ways to start small so that you aren't committing all of your time and energy into something you can do a pilot. Okay, there's the real possibility that your boss will get mad. And this is something where you need to assess. This is one of the big reasons why I've been saying, think about this in terms of your institution and think about it in terms of you personally. You need to gauge and adapt your decisions to reflect your institution's approach. So if at your institution, attendance is king, those numbers are the only ones that people really value, then that's a limitation you have to work within. See if there aren't ways to make a little space for trying something new, maybe within successful or adding something small. See if you can't find small ways to advocate for offering things that are different. Obviously, this is going to depend on your situation at work, but there might be space. The last thing I want to talk about is feeling embarrassed. So this is the other big reason that I a distinction between the institution and you. If you feel embarrassed, that's a personal thing, right? It is not, an institution can't feel embarrassment. And so when I feel embarrassed, I ask myself, work-related embarrassment, I ask myself, what's your role in this? Because programming isn't about me, right? It's not personal, the programs. Programming for me is about public service, right? So if I'm gonna let my fear of being embarrassed interfere with how I serve the community, then I'm not really doing my job, right? You're gonna feel embarrassed when things don't go well. You're gonna feel embarrassed when you can't seem to advance your slides with your spacebar. But that doesn't have to be the final word. In fact, don't let it be the final word. All right, so these are the questions to ask yourself. How do you respond to failure? How does your library respond to failure? And do those responses reflect your goals for your programs? Again, I'm talking about programming, but a lot of other libraries and elements fit into this too. Is the way that you're reacting to how something is going in line with your goals for that thing? Okay, so part of this question is assessing your goals for programs. And an important part of that is planning. So I'm going to finish up with just a little bit about planning. Planning style. And in this regard, I'm not talking about you personally. You may have an abiding love for wall calendars and color coding. I'm talking about your institution. Is the way in which your institution planning reflecting your values, reflecting your goals for what it is you're planning? So again, Red Hook is a case study. So around 6 years ago, Red Hook Public Library started using a program retreat. This started under the former director, so before my time. The first time Don said to me, "You want to join us in a program retreat?" I thought of this. I thought, oh, this is so cool. We're going to get away from the building. We're really going to let the ideas flow, figure things out. So this is not what a program retreat looks like. It looks like this. It looks like a lot of cookies. It looks like our community room. And it looks like a intense brainstorming session for both content and scheduling. This model of planning worked well and was in alignment with the ways in which programming was conceived of within the library when this model was started. At that time, programming was a slightly separate entity, and though there was content in response to community interests and there were questions asked of what the community wanted, the primary purpose within the institution of programming was to bring people into the library, was to get people into the library to see what the library had to offer, not just for the program, but in general. Well, over the years, there have been some changes. One of those changes is we have a different structure for programming staff. There is programming staff, and it turns out that the program retreats were no longer meeting our needs. We didn't need 4 hours to brainstorm content. And it had devolved into a 4-hour scheduling session that actually felt like a waste of our resources. So we sat back to think what kind of planning sessions would be more in alignment with our goals of how community. And we came up with the visioning meeting. So we're back to goat yoga and gurus in our titles. But bear with me. The thing about a visioning meeting is, as you might guess from all the words on the screen, it's not just about one thing. It's not a 4-hour meeting just about programming. It's a 4-hour meeting about the ways in which all the things that we can do at Red Hook Public Library overlap and interconnect. Again, this presentation is focusing on programming, so I'm going to take you through it, how a visioning meeting works, through the lens of programming. Just as easily, although perhaps a lot more boringly, take you through everything through the lens of finances or physical plan. So we like a gimmick as much as any institution, and we are an 8-sided building. We are an octagon. So when we came up with our visioning meeting plan, we came up with 8 facets of what we do: finances, services, programs, policies, physical plant, community relationships, staff, and collections. To work you through these things, I'm going to go back to the example of the Spanish-speaking families who were feeling unwelcome in some way, not because of staff necessarily, but because of their feelings about how they were perceived. So as we talked about this inside the library, it turns out it echoed a lot of what Dawn was hearing when she was out on committees in the community. There was lots of concern about how do we make Red Hook as a community more inclusive? How do we promote inclusion? How do we get people to see differences that scare them and lead them more towards a familiarity, a curiosity model? So there was a connection in what the community was caring about. The first thought was, well, let's try and change story time. What if we offer a bilingual story time so that stories are both in English and Spanish? Once we started thinking about that, well, we don't have any native Spanish speakers on our staff at this point. So there's implications for staff. We're going to need to be able to hire someone to do a bilingual story time, and that person needs to be a native speaker. Okay. So then there's further questions for the programming calendar. Do we really think it will promote inclusion if we have 2 story times a week, one bilingual and one solely in English? That doesn't meet our goal, right? Because our goal is inclusion and connection. So we change what our Wednesday morning program is. It's not a story time anymore. And that way people looking for story times are all going to be going to the bilingual story time. Well, once we started thinking about that, there's services that we want to add, right? We want to make sure that we have we've always had a library card registration form in Spanish, but what about our equipment use agreements that people use when they check out STEM toys or other kinds of tech? And then we started thinking, well, what about our policies? Maybe our policies should be translated. And all along on our back burner, we've always wanted to have a in Spanish. So now policies and services are involved. And once again, we are going to need to hire people to make sure that my clumsy academic translations aren't terrible. And then we started thinking, well, okay, we should probably look at our picture book collection in Spanish, because if we're going to have a story time in Spanish, we need to make sure we have some books. Well, it turns out our collection was a little dated and funky, so now we need to buy more books. So all of this takes us to money, right? In order to try something new, we needed to go out there and find a source of funding that would help us things. Ultimately, to sustain these changes, we're working them into our operating budget. But in the initial phase of this, we had to go out and write grants. And a local foundation that's very engaged in our community and with whom Dawn had had a lot of connections at meetings, they shared that and were very excited about the approach we were suggesting. So in that way, I hope it's become clear that all of these things have implications for each other, and they aren't separable. Why a visioning meeting is in better alignment with our goals for how programs will be part of how we serve our community. So that's it. If you have questions, I think there's some stuff in the chat, but I couldn't see it. If you have questions, we can answer them now, or here are our email addresses. Thank you very much.